Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing...
LaVie Tidhar!
Hi there! How are you today?
Hello! Very well, yeah. We're actually having, we have a bit of sunshine outside, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
I have the misfortune of living in England, which is not known for its sunny disposition.
Yeah, we're coming out of a polar vortex right now where I am, so it's looking much better now that the sun's out a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me about your books?
Can I? Where do I start? Well, I assume I'm supposed to be talking about the anthology that I'm editing, which is called The Best of World SF. And it's a huge anthology. It's the largest spine I've ever had on a book. You measure them by spine inches now. So it's a really big book. And then that's kind of a passion project of mine. I've been editing, international science fiction anthologies for about 10 years. I've been trying to get anyone interested in this, and I've been doing these with a small press in the States. And this is the first time that I get to do a big, definitive best of anthology of international speculative fiction from all over the world, from every continent except for America. But in my regular line of work, I'm a novelist mostly, short story writer, a bit of comics, and I've written too many novels to be perfectly honest. I don't expect anyone to read them.
Oh no, everyone should go read these. I certainly intend to. My book will be arriving soon. For years, I was like, oh, okay, I got it. I'm so excited to start reading them. So you said that it's an anthology with all of these writers from all over the world. How did you find these authors?
Well, it's much, much easier now. I mean, just to take you back, because I'm originally from Israel. So, English isn't even my first language. It's my second out of three, essentially. And, when I started writing, which was a long time ago, I'm getting old. But when I started writing, I actually had that sort of internal debate about whether I'm going to write in Hebrew or whether I'm going to write in English. And I kind of decided, out of sheer stubbornness to write in English, just because I wanted to crack the English language market. I had this delusion that I could actually succeed writing in the second language. And to begin with, it was very difficult because a lot of the times you're dealing with people who have never really read anyone from outside their immediate, science fiction was very, very white American sort of homogenous form. And it was very hard to get into it. And at the same time that I was kind of starting to break into magazines, you had a few other people who were doing that from outside, like Aliette de Bodard from France, was also writing in English, publishing around the same time as me. And it was very, very difficult. And so I always had the passion or, the selfish passion, if you will, because I knew the challenges that were involved in this, in getting anyone interested. I really wanted to help promote other writers who were in that position, or even in a position that they were writing in their original language and no one could read the brilliant stuff they're writing because of translation. And, to this date, hardly any novels in translation or short stories in translation are published in English. And if you look at, say, the European publishers, 50% of fiction in Europe is translated, as opposed to something like 3% of all English books are translated, and that includes, manuals. So it's a very different, it's a very one-sided conversation. And that was, again, just out of stubbornness, was something I wanted to change. And so when I was putting together the first anthology back in, I think I started in 2008, I was doing it. It was literally based on, a lot of the times, because I've been to these countries, I picked up books when I was there, and I would approach, I remember I was in Malaysia and I found a book of horror stories, Malaysian horror stories by a guy called Tunku Halim. And that was literally the only book I saw. So I actually, when I was putting the first one, I was reaching out to Tunku Halim and he let me publish his story in the anthology. or I was reaching out to, because I was in China and I've met Chinese science fiction writers, I was reaching out and saying, do you have any stories that you could give me? And this is before Ken Liu was doing any translations. This was before there were any really Chinese science fiction stories in English, you know. So part of the work there was, once they gave me these very rough translations, was to spend a lot of time editing them into readable form. And I ended up being like the first person to publish Han Song, the Chinese author Han Song, in English, who's one of the three major Chinese science fiction writers. So that was kind of the process, and I started a blog to sort of promote the anthologies, and then the blog took on its own life and kind of gathered, I guess, people who felt the same way. It gathered people around it who are now doing this sort of thing in other countries, which is really exciting. That was never my intention. But I kept doing the anthologies, and then I kept trying to push for a major publisher to do something like this, because it's never been done before. It's something that was done in the 1960s, but again, the editors were American or British. There was never, someone who was non-Anglophone putting together an anthology like this. And again, the last anthology you could even point to is 50, 60 years old. So I kept pushing, and basically publishers just kept saying no. They said, no one wants to read this. No one is interested in this. And it was almost like you have to wait for the entire publishing landscape to change in order to finally get this book done. So it's been a real, passion project for me, and I'm just really excited that it's coming out.
Well, this sounds like such a fantastic project, and I'm so grateful to have you on to talk about it. So, what inspired you to do this, like, from the start, seeing as how there's not really anything like it?
Well, again, I think it was just pure selfishness, because I couldn't, I had this challenge over and over when you're trying to get editors to publish your work when they've never seen work like this before, and they don't even have the tools to get to grips with it. So the easiest thing for them to do is to reject you. And I got a lot of rejections. And I'll be honest with you, some of those rejections I probably wouldn't have got if I was writing stories set in America about American characters, or American science fiction. But I wasn't doing that, and I wasn't really willing to be doing that either. So part of it was just pure stubbornness and pure selfishness, the fact that I think someone needs to be doing it. And if no one will do it for us, we have to do it ourselves. Now, obviously, things have changed a lot in the last 10 years, and I don't think I had a great deal to do with it. I think that the field has changed significantly. And if you look at the short story, if you look at short story publications for science fiction and fantasy, the most exciting stuff is really coming from outside the Anglo-American world now. And I think there's so many exciting writers coming in. And a lot of those writers are writers who, the same as me, are either writing in English as a second language or writing in different Englishes. Because don't forget, there's more Englishes than just American or British English. There's a lot of Englishes from India and elsewhere that people are writing in, and we're just getting this influx of new writers, and they have a room now. You're winning awards for the first time. I think I was the first Israeli writer to win a World Fantasy Award. And I think Zen Cho, I'm publishing Zen Cho's story as the closer for this anthology, and it's the first story by a Malaysian author to win a Hugo Award. So we keep seeing these firsts, the first Chinese author to win. And it's really, the field is changing significantly. But I still think there's a place for, this anthology to be sort of almost like a snapshot of a time and a place of where the field is now. And all the stories that I'm publishing, or most of the stories I'm publishing, are very recent. They're from the last 10 years. I think there's one or two stories that are a bit older, but it's very contemporary. It's very current. It's not meant to be an overview of the 20th or 21st century. It's really meant to be a book about now.
Yeah. Something that you just said really especially stuck out to me, how it's like a snapshot. Like, that's such an interesting thing to say. Like, it's so accurate. I find myself a lot of times, like, forgetting books are kind of forever, like, it's just immortalized, your words like that. And it's so incredible what you're doing, where you're having all of these authors coming together to like immortalize all of their work.
Well, I think, some writers are very well known, but a lot of the writers that I'm publishing now are people I published in the original anthologies, the small press anthologies I was doing, when no one knew who they were and no one was interested in who they were. And that's what really frustrates me, because if you look at the early anthologies, you can point out names that have become big names in genre who were struggling for years to get anyone to pay attention to them. I mean, I think the second volume, I published a story by Tade Thompson. And, Tade is now obviously a heavyweight science fiction writer. He's got the Clark Award. But he spent years trying to find any kind of mainstream publisher to show the slightest bit of interest, And one of the things I think we all heard, but like I remember having a conversation with an editor from one of the big publishers, and I was mentioning one of Tade's books. And the guy just said to me, well, we don't publish books set in Nigeria.
What?
And that killed the conversation completely. I mean, I just didn't know what to say to that. And for me as well as a writer, one of the things I went out and did, for example, is write a science fiction book set entirely in Tel Aviv, a book called Central Station. And I was convinced that no one was going to publish this or pay the slightest bit of attention exactly because of that, because we've all heard that you need to make your book set in America or worst case scenario in England. And that's been part of the frustration that I think any kind of international writer has felt at some point. And I'm just hoping if this book contributes a little bit to changing it and making it a bit easier for the next person to come along, then that's all I can really ask for.
Wow, I'm still like in shock over the reason they wouldn't set it Nigeria, but I think that really is a beautiful mission. That's the best that we can try and do in this world, is like to make it a little bit better for the next generation coming in.
I just, I can never claim to do anything out of the goodness of my heart. I mean, I do things because I get frustrated and angry, and this is a very powerful motivation. So, a lot of these books are just because you have this entire industry that tells you can't do something, you're going to go and do it, just to prove them wrong, just to shove it down their throat. And it's been frustrating. I mean, I remember the last publisher I talked to about this, I put together a pitch again, it was really awesome. And it took them less than an hour to turn it down.
Oh.
Less than an hour. And what do you say to them? What do you say? You just keep trying. You just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Yeah. And I think ultimately people are just missing out on some really amazing stuff. And again, if you look at the early anthologies and you look at the writers that I've put in here now, who were in those anthologies, you're talking about Lauren Bucas, you're talking about Tade Thompson, you're talking about Zen Cho, Aliette de Bodard. They're all people who have gone on to have major careers in science fiction and fantasy, to have, published by the big five publishers, to have awards, to have all of those things. But when I published them, they were just. It beggars belief that no one else was paying attention, because you could have looked at those writers that were working then and saying, these are good writers, I should be publishing them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I am ranting at this.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm listening I'm just taking it all in. Yeah. So kind of circling away from this conversation, which we probably will come back to. But earlier you mentioned that you have been writing for a very long time. How did you get your start?
Well, I'm essentially a short story writer at heart, and that's really how I started off as a poet. My first publication was a Hebrew poetry collection. As you can imagine, it became a huge bestseller, and now I started off as a poet and realized there was. At some point, I made the switch to fiction, and also made the switch to English from Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a short story writer for a very long time. I wasn't even in a rush to publish a novel. So I think my first novel was out in 2010. And, I've got 2 novels coming out this year, plus a graphic novel, plus a few backlist books are being reissued and so on. But my first love is still writing short stories, which is also, I think, where the most exciting stuff in genre is happening. So, if you want to see where the field is, you should always look at where the short stories are and not where the novels are, because the novels are always going to be behind the exciting stuff that is happening.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit on the differences between writing short stories and writing full-length novels?
Novels are hard. I find them very, very difficult. And yet I've written quite a few of them. So, don't ask me how that works. What I've discovered, with the last few books I've done is that actually I can do them. I find it easier to do if I write them almost like I'm writing short stories. So I'm writing them in sections, and each section is almost like a story in itself. And I can actually go really long that way. So my last book in the States was out last year. It's a book called By Force Alone, and it's a big book. It's kind of the punk version of Arthurian Britain, if you will. It's a very strange book, but it's 125,000 words or something. It's a big hardcover book, but it feels very tight because it's really written in sections, almost like it's written in episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not wasting words, but at the same time, I'm not feeling the pressure of having to write a massive novel because I'm only writing one particular section of a novel, and then sort of putting them together like mosaics. So there's something very comforting in writing a novel because you get up every day and you know what you're supposed to be doing, and you get to write a little bit more. And once you finish the novel, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. It's very difficult. Yeah. But I still write a lot of short stories. I mean, last year I tried to do one a month, so I tried to do 12 short stories last year. And they're much more immediate. They're much more fun. You can get them published, while you're working on a book. And books just take such a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. As someone who has done NaNoWriMo for 2 years now, it is like very much what you were saying, where you get up every day, you're like, oh yes, I know what I'm going to do. And then at the end, you're just like, oh no. What am I going to do? And like sometimes it can be hard to find motivation like to edit, at least from my personal experience.
Yeah, editing is not much fun. I actually did something that's a bit like a NaNoWriMo thing. When the latest lockdown came, I just couldn't concentrate on anything. And so I ended up writing a short novel in short chapters because that was my concentration was enough for like a tiny little chapters every couple of days. And then I realized that even though I finished writing it, I don't have the mental capacity to sit down and edit the book. So I kind of put it down. I put it away for a while, and I'm waiting for like a couple of weeks when I'm just going to be allowed to sit down quietly and actually read through it. But it's all part of, and the more you publish, the more of that sort of work you have, that you have to copy edit one book and read proofs on another book and 100 things in between. And sometimes you just think, all I want to do is actually just write stuff.
Yeah. When you're in the editing process, do you ever find it difficult, like, to read back through your old writing, or, like, when you're reprinting books like that, do you ever have to read through it again and are like, oh,
they're terrible books. They're terrible books. No, I love my work. So, I'm very passionate about getting my books republished. Because I always think if a book was worth publishing once, it's worth publishing again. And my view is always if the original publishers didn't do a good enough job with selling this, then let's find another publisher to do it. So this year I've got 2 of my favorite books getting reissued in the UK. Books called A Man Livestreaming and Osama, which Osama was the one that won the World Fantasy Award back in 2012, I think. And A Man Lies Dreaming is one of my favorite books that, sometimes you just have bad luck as well, as you know, in this industry. I mean, the pandemic has obviously been a bit of bad luck for anyone who had books out last year, but it's not restricted to global pandemics, unfortunately. There's always things that go wrong. And, if you like the book, if you believe in your work, then you just keep at it. Yeah, occasionally. I mean, I do like reading some of my stuff, but I don't really spend, there are other people to read, and I've already written it.
Yeah.
I don't need to read it too much. But it's nice when you go back to it and you read it and you think, that's not bad. Yeah. That's always a nice surprise. It doesn't completely suck.
Oh, yeah. That happens to me sometimes. When I look back, I'm like, oh, wait, I like that part, actually. So you talked about how you published a book of poetry before. How do you think that writing that has impacted your other works?
Well, I mean, I like poetry and I like a certain lyricism with writing, without wanting it to overwhelm. I think you adapt the style you're writing to what it is you're writing. But also, I think because I'm not, English isn't my first language, I think what happens with that is that you pay a little bit more attention to the rhythm of the language, the words, and the construction of sentences would not always be the way that a native speaker would do it. And I think, in the past, it was a case of editors trying to make your English conform to standardized English. And I actually think there's a certain freedom, there's a certain joy in having the language reflect who you are. So I do find that occasionally I would be using certain things, especially with genre. Genre readers don't necessarily like pretty writing, and they don't necessarily like what's the word I'm looking for? There are certain literary techniques that genre readers really don't like very much, but I do. Mm-hmm. and I don't care. Essentially, I write for myself. I don't write for a hypothetical audience.
Yeah.
But occasionally you'd run into I have a book called The Violent Century, which I'm very fond of. But it doesn't use. It's written in the present tense, and it doesn't use speech marks. And not using speech marks is actually a fairly standardized. It's a fairly normal thing that you can do with a book. But it did drive quite a few readers mad in genre because they've never seen it before. They've never read a book before that didn't have speech marks in it. And they found it incredibly frustrating. Oh. And I'm like, fair enough. No one should ever have to like a book or, appreciate a book. But I found it interesting that I'm like, do you only read genre? Because this is not something that I invented or is particularly original. This is fairly standard literary technique, and which I used for a specific reason, whether someone likes it or not. So things like that, I do borrow from a different set of conventions occasionally, and it does prove difficult sometimes with readers. Some people appreciate, some people don't know what you're going on about. A lot of my references tend to be quite obscure because they don't come from a culture that people would be familiar with. But it's no reason not to put them in. Yeah.
Do you have any favorite authors or any authors that have inspired you and inspired you to do things more like what you were saying, how you didn't use the speech marks and that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think if I'm lucky, then every couple of years I find an author who does something new and to me and interesting, and I learn from them. One of the writers who actually did have a big influence on my work is a friend of mine. He's an Israeli writer called Shimon Adaf, who is in Israel is considered one of the top literary authors and top poets. top Hebrew poets, and he's actually going to be published in the States now. I think FSG are publishing his crime detective trilogy at some point. I don't know when, because the pandemic and everything has been a bit of. So I hope more people discover his work, because he's at the same time he's the most literary writer I can think of, but at the same time he's a huge science fiction fan, and you can kind of see how he mixes the poetry and the political and science fiction and the Bible and all kinds of things into his books, and using different techniques. And that was a huge inspiration for me when I started reading his stuff. I thought, wow, So when you find anyone who you really admire, you just try and steal what they do, basically, in some form or another.
Yeah. So what interested you about science fiction?
Well, I think my brain is a bit broken,
Oh.
I can only think in a weird angle on things. I can't really write. I'm actually writing a book at the moment. I'm writing a huge book at the moment that is not genre fiction. It's a big, and it's very interesting to me because I wasn't even sure if I could do it. I'm like, can I do a book without elves or aliens in it?
Yeah.
It's the mutants or maniacs. No mutants or maniacs.
Are you able to share anything about what this new book's about?
No. I mean, it will be out in 2022 in the UK. Fingers crossed,
Yeah.
And I don't know about an American publication, but it's very exciting because for one thing, I've discovered that I can do it. But generally speaking, my mind is kind of drawn to anything that is weird, anything that is out of kilter. And when I was a kid, these were the things that attracted me. And I grew up on a very steady diet of translated American science fiction, and particularly the sort of the 60s stuff, the Roger Zelazny and Samuel Delaney. And with the 60s in science fiction in America, I think was when they really went all out. You could just do anything you wanted in a story. And some of the stuff they did, would never get published today. I mean, they did some crazy, crazy books.
Mm-hmm.
There's, just the covers alone are incredible. So that's kind of how I was, and I still do. I still love that. And now I have the chance. I also write or co-write the science fiction fantasy book column for the Washington Post. And so I get a chance to actually keep up with the field and what's being published. And I get, I have a lot of books passing through my desk now, and I get to at least get an idea of what people are doing.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fun though. Like you're able to stay up more on the current trends of like where the stuff is going in science fiction.
Well, it gives me an idea, but the thing is, I write this column with Silvia Moreno Garcia, and we both like the stuff that isn't really the bread and butter stuff. It's not the stuff that everyone else reads. We don't want to cover the books that we know everyone else is going to be covering. We want to talk about books that people don't know. So our focus is much more on weird stuff, on international stuff, on small press stuff. And it's just amazing to me that we actually get to do that. We get to write these columns. And we did a column just now about books that got turned into movies for the Washington Post. And we came up with a bunch of international books and really interesting titles.
Mm-hmm.
And we had over 200 comments to the piece, and they were all about Robert Heinlein and Starship Troopers, because I happened to mention I like the film of Starship Troopers in the introduction.
Yeah.
And they completely ignored every other book recommendation in the column, and they just wanted to talk about Robert Heinlein. And there's nothing you can do about it. This is kind of how it goes. But we try to push books that people haven't heard of. And
really
at least anecdotally, I know people say that when we recommend a book, people buy it. So that's really fantastic that we, it's a wonderful gig because you just get to be nice about books you really like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I do on here too. It's just like,
Yeah,
I get sent books and then I read them and I like them pretty much 99% of the time. And yeah.
well, see, my inclination is to hate books.
Oh.
So I feel like I'm, it's my karma. I'm kind of earning out my karma by actually being nice about lots of books in a public forum, to make up for me being occasionally mean about books. But at least I try and, keep that private. No, it's great. It's
yeah. And also when you were saying the book to movie adaptation thing, I was like so thankful that you said that you were trying to do ones that are a little bit more obscure, because every time I see any list like that, it's like, okay, Harry Potter. And it's
right.
just, okay.
I forgot about Harry Potter.
We all know about Harry Potter. Everyone's seen those movies.
Well, what amazed me was that 20 years after making Starship Troopers, American readers still don't get the movie, which is it's a fascist parody of basically Verhoeven, who's a Dutch director, absolutely hated Starship Troopers, absolutely hated Heinlein, and he made his entire film as basically a parody of fascism. They're literally, if the people you're rooting for in the film, they're literally dressed in SS uniforms. The propaganda reels are literally based on Leni Riefenstahl Nazi propaganda films, and people absolutely miss that, that the whole thing is just a wonderful comedy about fascism, which is it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible, but it's kind of like that is my natural instinct, to be doing that sort of thing. So I love the film for just how ridiculously over the top, it is, and the fact that people didn't get it is even better in a way.
When you're describing it now, I'm like, how did they not get that? Oh my goodness.
Well, the question is also, how did he get away with it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I've got a book called A Man Livestreaming, which is one of my favorite books that I wrote, and it very much owes to that sort of, it's got that DNA of that Verhoeven thing in it. Mm-hmm. So it's a book about Adolf Hitler as a private detective.
Oh.
In a world where he never came to power, so he's just a sad, angry, and bitter man, but still in a world where fascism is going on. Which was strange. I wrote, it was published in 2014, and I never really expected Brexit and Trump to happen 2 years later.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a strange experience reading it now as opposed to reading it before. But it's really a book that talks about forces in the world that have been going on for years, and basically a reflection of the 1930s and Nazi Germany, but done as a black comedy.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to read that book. That sounds fascinating.
It's a bit graphic. It's a graphic book, but I think it's a very funny book.
Oh.
I just don't think anyone thought it was funny, which is fair enough. Just like a lot of people thought Starship Trip is a terrible movie, And I think we kind of moved way away from the best of all this stuff.
Oh, well, I was mostly just having you on to talk about your books along with the anthology, so it's all right. I'm going to have to ask my dad if he's seen Starship Troopers. I think he has, but that sounds right up his alley. With that kind of, parody almost? Satire?
Oh, it absolutely is, yeah. I mean, you're basically rooting the Nazis in the film. Oh. That's kind of that was his concept. You've got these beautiful blonde soldiers, and they're fighting alien bugs, so it's okay because they're killing bugs, Yeah, I absolutely adore Verhoeven. I think just the fact that he managed to work in Hollywood, it seems unimaginable that anyone would make a film like this today.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and of course, I think with a lot of my books, they just sound like a bad joke if you kind of sum them up in a sentence, And the whole thing about A Man Livestreaming, which is essentially a literary novel, really, with, it has alternate history and things called noir in it, but it is it's a confusing book for people sometimes. But I think a lot of the books, like the book I have coming out this year in the States, is a book called The Escapement. It's coming out in October, and I really, really love this book. And I think it's a very heartfelt book. It's a fantasy, and it's about a father who's searching for a cure for his son's illness across a fantastical landscape. Right? And if I say it like that, it sounds all right, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But my pitch for it, and what spoils it every time, is I basically tell people it's a clown western.
Oh.
Which it is. It's a clown western. I think in the genre of clown westerns, it's probably at the top.
I personally am liking all of your sides of the pitches too. I think both of these sound fun. It just sounds a little funnier when you say it that way.
Well, it turns out no one in publishing likes clowns, which I was not aware of.
Oh.
When I was pitching it. So yeah, but it's both, But I think it's funnier when you say clown western, and it's not untrue. But the publishers definitely want to stay away from any mention of clowns. Oh. Which is unfortunate if you start reading the book. But, so I'm kind of in a happy place right now because I do get to write the books I want to write. I've got two supportive publishers in both the UK and the US, and I get to do what I want to do, which is amazing.
Yeah, that is incredible. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great discussion. I just have one last question for you today, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, I mean, I have six books coming out.
Oh, boy.
No, I mean, we talked about The Escapement briefly, which I love this book, the Clowns or No Clowns. I love this book. And I've got The Best of War SF coming out just now, or in June, I think, isn't it, in the United States? Which is, again, it's a book that's taken me like 10 years to get going, so I'm really excited about it. I've got another novel. I've been working on basically a sequence of books by accident that I'm calling The Antimatter of Britain. So it's taking all the most treasured legends of England, the King Arthur and Robin Hood and et cetera, and just destroying them completely because I can't stand any of it. So the first one is a book called By Force Alone that came out last year. And then my second one is just called The Hood, which is obviously sort of about Robin Hood, and that's coming out in the UK in October. So that's two novels in both sides. And then I've got a graphic novel called Adler, which is coming out at the end of March. So just in a few weeks.
Well, good luck. That is incredible. Everyone keep an eye out for these new books coming out. Go read his back catalog. Well, yeah, once again, this was so great to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been fun.
Oh, yeah. I had a great time on here. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm LaVie Tidhar.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after, the end.
The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. This episode is hosted by Molly Southgate. It is edited by Rob Southgate and produced by Southgate Media Group. You can get in touch with the show at readbetweenthelines@gmail.com, or you can send us a voicemail at 708-887-9473. That was 708-887-9473. You can also find us on Instagram at Read Between the Lines Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.